Identify as a female or gender fluid, right?
Yeah, I'd say I'm gender fluid. Like I say, I'm probably male in most of my day-to-day life, but when it comes to fighting in wars
and especially
driving,
talking about war might make people really think about
very
how masculine they want to be in regards to fighting in 180 or 190 countries. We have U.S. military currently,
exactly,
and actively fighting battles, and I think 100, I believe.
How many hundreds of military bases in foreign countries? I mean, it's incredible. So as far as the how, so I had to go get my license renewed. Initially, I just tried to check female on the box for my new license, and they were like, no, you can't do this. And so I was like,
who said you can't do this?
The woman at the DMV, she said, if you want to, because my license originally on my license was male, or my gender on my original license was male. So I actually had to get a doctor's note. So I got the letter from the DMV. It had to be signed by like a licensed medical associate.
And when you went to your doctor for an appointment specifically for this, you didn't question, your doctor didn't question about how, about why you identify as a female or anything? Or?
Well, so I went to just a Manchester Health Clinic. I didn't go to my.
So it wasn't your primary care doctor,
right? It wasn't my primary care doctor, and just because.
Yeah, it probably would have taken months anyway to get an appointment.
Yeah, exactly. Probably would have taken months to get an appointment, and I mean, my doctor has known me for So if I had tried to say now I'm
but again, and what we're going to get into is he might not have questioned you. Again, you can be you can have a history of being the most 100% masculine man who never had gender confusion or identity, any difference in identity, and one day you can go to your doctor, and again, either with legal pressure or just cultural pressure in general. I don't think most doctors, my doctor, I don't think he would even dare. I don't think that he would have the backbone, the will to question my identity. If I went to my doctor right now and said I'm a female, do you feel like they kind of have to give you what you want and I guess take it at face value?
No, I mean, I feel like the practitioner I went to really pressed me, really wanted to learn more about it. But it was very respectful in the way that she did it.
And did you mention the wars? And when you think about war, that's when you feel more feminine?
No, I didn't mention that. I just said, sometimes I feel feminine.
Yeah.
And I feel like a woman, and I'd like to be known as a woman. And I was actually really surprised by how easy it was. Not surprised in a negative way, but I just had never understood what that was. Immediately, I was offered androgenizing drugs.
Wow.
Yeah. So she said, we'll get you set up with a prescription for estrogen. And she said, here's the timeline. So she said, like 1 to 2 years, your hips will get rounder. 2 to 3 years.
Wow.
You might you'll have breast tissue growing. And I was like, whoa,
wow.
Okay.
You don't feel that feminine.
Yeah. And then, she gave me a list of plastic surgeons and hair removal.
Wow.
So, so I really for anyone who is maybe seriously transgendered, not to say that I'm gender fluid when it comes to war and car insurance. But someone who's seriously transgender, it's kind of nice, how seriously they can.
Yeah. Well, New Hampshire, we are one of the most tolerant states, I think.
Oh,
very, very tolerant.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we spoke about that with the New York Times articles saying we weren't tolerant.
We did. Yeah.
So I want to get into how this really affects the government aspect of things, and then the courts and the law, and how the state kind of gets involved in every aspect of our lives, from your marriage to your children to all the documentation for your kids being born and going to school and every step of life, and whether you're married and involved in your gender and your license. Everything kind of it has to be official. If the government doesn't say it, it's not official. If you get married and you love someone and you form a union with them religiously or otherwise, it's not really official. And society, I don't think, really recognizes it outside of the super religious small groups that are super religious. Society doesn't recognize you as being married unless the government gives you that paper. And it's the same way with licenses and so many other certifications that the government has to certify, which is very interesting. But before we get to the government, I want to talk about some private sector issues, which is more complicated because we generally go on what's the law. We don't talk about a whole lot about the private businesses because we believe in absolute property rights, which I think you do too.
Absolutely.
Now, a few things that I know, again, from my background in healthcare, in hospitals, but also EMS on the ambulances. Hospitals very often, for certain populations especially, hospitals try to have a same gender provider, be it doctor, nurse, tech. They have the same gender provider, provide care, especially for certain populations, sometimes minors, but sexual assault, when a woman comes in for a rape kit or something for an ER, which I've transported a few of these from one facility to another, they, for obvious reasons, want to have a female doctor examine them, of course, but also many OB issues, OBGYN issues. It's a lot of females. When I did rotations, the OB rotation was almost all females. All the residents doing the surgery, the OBs and the surgeons, a lot of females, and it makes more sense in general. If I were a woman, I'd be a lot more comfortable with a female doctor and nurse examining me, of course. Also, the psych patients, anyone with acute mental illness or a chronic mental illness, very often in the ER, in the hospital, they have a female provider for females and a male provider for males. It makes more sense. And especially for transports. So as we were discussing earlier, it's when you're in the ambulance, it really is vulnerable. And unfortunately, some providers would take advantage of those who have mental illness and who either can't speak because they have advanced MR, or they won't be believed. There was actually an incident. I think there was a hospital somewhere in New York where a lot of the psych patients ended up pregnant, and they eventually got to the bottom of it. And I think it was that while being transported in the ambulances, just horribly sick.
Yeah.
And that's when they're vulnerable because there are no cameras. Whereas the facility, the nursing, the psych facility and the hospital might have cameras. So for obvious reasons, I know of at least one big hospital system, EMS system, that always has a female in back of the ambulance in the patient compartment with a female psych patient. That way they can't accuse you of any issues because it makes it more difficult, at least, to be accused of sexual assault. Not that it can't happen, but it just gives them at least some cushion, some cover for legal trouble. They have males with males and females with males, and they always have a female EMT with all the female psych patients, even if they're 9 years old or 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. And if they only have two males on the EMT crew, they'll provide a female nurse or tech. They always have a female in back with that female patient. Now, I've been wondering for the last few years how this gender identity movement of New York City, and this is in New York, I believe New York City recognizes legally 31 genders. There are 31 different genders, from male, female, male to female, transgender, gender fluid, non-binary, all the other gender identities that people might identify as. And according to the law, you actually, the reason I think the law came to be in New York City is because employers have to refer to their employees by their preferred pronoun. And if an employee tells an employer they want to be called by he or she or they or whatever other gender.
My pronouns are Your Majesty.
Yeah, I've heard of that one. So if you actually tell your employer in New York City, I believe, that you want to be called by a certain pronoun, and they call you by a different one, so they refuse to call you she, even though you're now a female, they still call you he, and you prove malicious intent that they did it, on purpose and they knew better. I think the penalty or the lawsuit, but I think it's a penalty that it could be $250,000 fine in New York City, I believe. So you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it might have been a case where they were awarded $250,000, but I think it's a fine of $250,000 in New York City. So they recognize 31 genders. Now this system works in New York City and the surrounding counties too. But what are they going to do going forward in a decade when more municipalities, cities, and states, and maybe the federal government, when they recognize there are 31 genders? In Massachusetts, there was actually a bill, and they were either considering a vote on 73 different genders, or they had a vote on 73 genders in regards to a license plate for male and female. They wanted, at least some people in the Massachusetts State House a few weeks ago, I believe, wanted 73 genders. So again, it's varying, and there's a movement of people who are now coming out who are identifying as more than just the two genders. So what I'm just curious, I don't know if you have any thoughts, but I'm curious what private institutions like EMS and hospitals and other institutions will do when they can't document male female. On every documentation form for every patient for EMS, and I think doctors as well, they have to check male or female. Will that be expanded to 30 or more?
It's tough to say, and with some people like to make the distinction between gender and biological sex. Some people don't make that distinction. I mean, the fact is, people are individuals. Everyone has different levels of hormones, whether that's testosterone and estrogen. Everyone has different life experiences. Everyone has different preferences as well. So it's tough when you have a centrally organized system such as the licensing. Like with New Hampshire licenses, for example, you can only select male or female. So for someone who doesn't identify with either of those genders,
what do they do?
Yeah, I'm not sure. But it is also difficult because I feel like sometimes there are benefits or preferences that people have to deal with someone of a specific gender. One example would be, being a woman and preferring to see a woman doctor. I think that's a very reasonable request. And I think if
I
that was
prefer seeing male doctors.
I also
I always
prefer
have, yeah.
to see male doctors for sure. And I don't think that's an intolerant preference. I don't think that that can be labeled as such.
Then, personally,
that's
I don't think any preference. And I think I just published an article on libertyblog.com, and I could link it in the show notes as well, about discrimination. And I pretty much say discrimination is inherent to choice. When I choose to be with a certain woman of a certain ethnicity, I am by default
excluding
discriminating.
every other
Discriminating and offending every other race.
Right.
I've never dated a Chinese woman. Am I discriminating against them? Does it matter if what if I've dated women from every other nation but not China? What if only half the nations? When is it discrimination? And every choice. I had McDonald's a few times in the last week. No Burger King. Am I discriminating against them? I'm discriminating, but they don't have a certain color or gender identity, so it's not an issue. But I discriminate against. I've never dated a trans person, not that I know of. So we discriminate in every choice. Every choice. I drink Coke more than Pepsi. I just always like Coke more. Am I discriminating against Pepsi? I am, and that's okay. And personal preference. Again, the laws are different. We'll get into laws and about all the protected classes of the laws and the ever increasing amount of protected classes.
Yeah, I have something for that, Elliot.
Yeah.
So I looked up the $250,000 fine thing, and it looks like that. And I'm trying to be as unbiased about this as I can. So I'm using pretty leftist sites like Washington Post and Snopes. And even according to them, the new guidelines, discrimination against a transgender individual could result in fines up to $250,000. From the articles I've read, it doesn't seem all that clear as to what would constitute discrimination.
I think
it doesn't seem to be
knowingly misgendering an employee. I think it's for employers.
So if I don't want to date a transgender woman, am I discriminating?
Yeah, and that's the thing, and that's
is that a
why.
hate crime,
and I think us libertarians, we are called pro-discrimination, and I'm 100% pro-discrimination
pro-discrimination
on a personal level. I have a preference. I have an affinity for everything in my life. I like certain things. I like
the shirt you're wearing.
I like plaid shirts. I've been wearing plaid shirts primarily for like 20 years now, since I was in middle
solid
school.
Color.
Yeah. We all have preferences, and I again, as an individual, as a property rights absolutist, as a libertarian, as a free market believer, I am the biggest advocate of discrimination because it's choice. And discrimination, again, we talk about words that sound good and sound bad. Equality sounds good. Discrimination sounds bad.
Yeah, that's
not the case.
That's the Orwellian training that we've gone through public schooling and other and national media and things like that. The fact is that if someone wants to discriminate in a way that I think is offensive, for example, I have a lot of black friends. I like black people. There's no bias there.
Yeah.
If someone wants to express that bias, to me, that would be very offensive.
And that's exactly what I wrote about. Yeah.
I don't think you can judge someone based on the color of their skin, but I think that person shouldn't be forced
to have friends of any ethnicity
or to do business with anyone of any ethnicity.
Yep.
Now, I would never do business with someone who decides to discriminate against someone because of the color of their skin. I think that's offensive. I think that's wrong. I think that's a very old philosophy that doesn't work anymore. But should have the freedom to do so. I don't think they should be forced to sell their property to anyone. You should be able to discriminate and not give anyone your property for any reason. And that's not a radical philosophy. That's property rights 101.
Yeah, that's exactly what I just wrote about the HUD and the DOJ are actually suing Facebook, I believe. I think they're taking them to court because they allowed for some property owners and property management companies to advertise to, when they advertise on Facebook and they target certain ethnicities, apparently they excluded some because they didn't want disabled people to be renting their apartments and stuff because they're just more difficult tenants naturally, but also some races. They didn't want, I think, maybe black, some Latino countries they excluded in targeting, which again, is it bigoted? Yeah, it is. It is racist if you're in a not target, you don't want to rent out to black people, but we can't have even worse than that is having a law where the federal government controls commerce and controls housing. Mm-hmm. The more the government controls housing, the worse society gets. Coming from New York, I know that.
If you don't like racism, don't do business with racists.
So I want to get back.
Ostracism is a fantastic way of
absolutely. I want to talk more about licenses and abolishing the gender, but I want to talk about insurance as well and just mention one quick thing about insurance. Mm-hmm. And I learned this years ago when I saw that a female counterpart who was right around my age, within a year of my age, had insurance in New York. I think it was like a fifth of what I was paying a month. It was ridiculous. I didn't believe it. I had to double check the numbers that it was 2 digits and I was paying 3 digits, of course, per month.
Yeah.
And apparently what insurance companies say, and again, they're private. So I'm not going to get into the legal standpoint, but just culturally, back to the private sector for a minute. The insurance companies, they say that males get in more accidents. What are they going to say in years to come when there are 73 genders and male? It doesn't necessarily mean that binary distinction that it used to be, male and female, because currently they say males get in more accidents because of just this more risk-taking behavior. Is it true? It probably is.
No, it is true.
It is. It's a fact.
True.
And again, I know the basics of medicine and psychology.
Yeah.
Males will take more risks.
Right.
It's the testosterone, the brain, it's everything else.
Less risk management. Absolutely.
I might also say that males, I think, physically, as far as agility, physically, on average, might be more skilled drivers as far as physically.
Yeah.
Can you go 200 miles per hour? Can the average male go 100 miles per hour more comfortably than the average female can? Probably, as far as skill.
Maybe.
But again, but here's the issue. That is true, but at the same time, these insurance companies and others on the left do say that it's wrong to say anything about one gender. Say one gender does one thing, or I guess make a statement about a gender, a broad statement. They say, oh, you can't, say all females do one thing or all males do one thing. Yet with insurance companies, they do it, but I don't see that same feminist aggression against insurance companies because it benefits them hundreds of dollars a month, right?
Right.
Did your insurance rates already go down, by the way?
Yeah, my insurance rates dropped by $60 when I changed my gender.
Jeez. You know what percentage of a drop that was? It's pretty cheap.
It was like
in New Hampshire,
30%.
Jeez, that's incredible.
It's like a 30% drop. So what it's tough because when you look at humanity and you zoom out and you get enough data points, there are differences between different kinds of groups of people. There are differences between men and women. There are differences between different races.
Yeah.
Now, the issue comes in when you take an individual, you look at the group that they belong to, and you say, because this individual belongs to this group, they must have X characteristics. Because this person is male, they must be a bad driver. That's not the right thing to do, but it's important.
But sometimes it's pretty true.
Acknowledge. Well, they might have an inclination. So, for example, men have higher insurance rates because we're more likely to get speeding tickets, to get to accidents, things like that when we're young.
No, it's correct as far as the appraisal of the actuaries. It's
Absolutely
correct that we cost more to insure. We cost more, damage to a car.
But if you just pick Joe Schmo, you can't say, oh, because Joe Schmo is
as
male,
an individual, you don't know
exactly
about that individual. Just the group,
But it's tough because I feel like a lot of these people on the left, they look at some of the perks that maybe a specific group gets because of the way that group exists. So, for example, like you look at women have lower insurance rates than males, and
they don't get drafted.
Right, and so
if a draft comes back, there's selective service that you have to sign up for. I think when you register to vote or when you turn 18, you're automatically enrolled.
Yeah,
the women. They will never, if a draft comes back to America, because Trump gets us in a war with China or North Korea or Russia, if a draft comes back, males will have to serve, females won't. So I say that's a benefit.
No, there's definitely a lot of perks to being.
In some countries, females do.
But you know, it's funny. So I sent the draft.
Yeah, you told me you emailed Selective Service.
So I emailed Selective Service
saying to take it off of the.
I said, the law states only men have to register for the draft. The law specifically states any able-bodied male citizens. I'm no longer a male citizen. I'm now female. I'd like to have my name removed from the draft. And they said, oh no, it's based on your gender at birth. So sorry, no. And I thought, and I read the law. It does not say gender at birth.
And this is the federal government.
Male citizens.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So that's what happens when you have a big overwhelming.
And there's a lot as far as the military. There's a law about transgenders. About I think Trump. At least I heard. I don't know how concrete it was. Trump, I guess, is supporting transgenders in the active combat less than previous administration. Or says transgender shouldn't be in combat. I don't know if he actually, went through with that military order.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. But there's a lot to talk about with transgenders and in the military and all that.
Certainly.
But I want to talk about licenses a little more before we get to the other government institutions like government prisons and courts and schools and all that.
Yeah.
Why not? And someone asked me a few days ago, why not just remove that little M or the F from the license, the binary distinction on the license, male or female? Why do we need it? Why not remove the whole thing and get rid of a whole lot of drama?
Yeah, it's tough to understand why the government would need to know what's between my legs.
Yeah,
but for what purpose?
And for identity.
How is it your
you have a picture? You have to have a current picture.
You have to have a picture. You have to have your height, weight. You have to have your hair color, eye color.
That does more than the male or female because as far as identifying you and making sure you're the person that you say you are on your license, the picture, I understand why it's there so they can see who you are.
Yeah, but
the male or female doesn't do much.
I know
for
some
them.
girly looking dudes.
Yeah,
and I know some manly looking women. You know,
yeah.
So it's so arbitrary.
Yeah, so there are a lot of other issues that I think are going to become more evident in the next few years within the government, and it matters because this is the law. So the private institutions ultimately, we believe, can do anything they want, but as far as prisons, let's talk about prisons for a minute. Currently, all the prisons, all the state prisons, federal prisons, I believe they're all segregated, right? Male and female. Male prisons only, female prisons only, right?
Absolutely.
And just the little bit I know about the psychology of prisoners, a tiny bit, I would think that if you're a male prisoner, the last thing you want to do is stay in prison. I've transported a few prisoners in the ambulance going to a hospital. Very often, and I'm sure a lot of them are BS claims, a prisoner might say, I have chest pain or back pain, and they're both kind of unprovable. Back pain's the great unprovable. You can't prove they don't have back pain.
Yeah.
So they say that, and they go to the hospital. They get to see pretty nurses for a few days. They get to go out in the open air, go on an ambulance, which is more risk for escaping and escaping prison because now you're being transported, you're being moved. But they get to spend a few days in the hospital hanging out with the nurses. That's better than being in prison, you know, for those few days, right? So they want to get out. Now, but I'm sure a lot of males, especially those who are in there for sexual assault or those who are doing it in prison, I'm sure a lot of them would love to get to a female prison, right? To do what they're going to do to females.
Yeah.
Currently, going forward, and again, this is a serious question. What's to stop 30% of the males in male prisons, the deviants, the attackers, from saying they identify as female, go to a doctor and maybe getting a note from the prison doctor, and the law will, because of the government, they will force the prison, which is run by the government, to transport that person to a female prison to serve the remainder of their term. And then they can be an actual male 100%, just saying I identify as a female.
Well, even now, instances of rape and sexual assault in prisons, just male prisons, is extremely
I'm sure.
high.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrifying. I can't imagine going to prison. But I want to see the ACLU and I want to see the LGBT community,
stand up for women,
stand up for women, or
and I want to see women stand up for women.
But it's such a tough issue though, because it's like, if it's some big burly 6'3", 250-pound jack dude, and he's like, yeah, I'm a woman. Are we?
You can't disprove it. Is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you can't disprove it.
And that's what's tough, is when you say it's a spectrum and it depends on your own perspective. Then it's like, well, what's going to stop instances like that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
So that's, I think, a big issue. And I think that the courts, because ultimately these cases will go to court, the courts will be overwhelmed. Look for some more circuits to be created on a federal and state level over the next decade. That's what I predict. They will be overwhelmed by these cases, I think. And there's the prison issue. There's the whole school issue. There are so many of these issues where the government run. Yeah. So I want to get into the bathroom issue a little bit because New Hampshire state government and Sununu signed the law a few months ago that I believe forced the private businesses, every private business in New Hampshire, to allow, it forces them to let people into the bathroom that they say they identify with. So if I walk into any business in New Hampshire and say I want to use the women's restroom, according to the way I interpret House Bill 1319, I believe they would have to let me into the female bathroom. Every private establishment.
I've got a license that says so.
Yeah, and especially for you, but even for me, because otherwise it's discrimination. Yeah. And the problem with this is it violates property rights because they have rights to that property. That's how I see it.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And I want to talk about schools as well. What's your take overall, being gender fluid, especially with the school districts? A lot of school districts throughout the country, I believe, are now forcing the school staff to let anyone into any bathroom, locker room, and shower that corresponds with the gender they identify with at any given moment.
Yeah, showers. I didn't even think of that, but that's just it's.
But how do you do? What's the solution? Do you think
go with biology?
Yeah, but that's hard.
If you guys won't say it, then I will. This is an easy solution. There are two sexes. There are two genders.
I actually have an easier solution. I think the way to solve this issue, as far as what should the government do about school districts, I say get the government out of education.
Oh,
the
yeah.
government shouldn't be, taking our money by force and
Well,
using
and
it to
there's
run
your
schools
answer.
to
Yeah,
indoctrinate our kids.
exactly. See, everything has to be centrally planned when the funding itself comes from taxation. It has to, you have to take these fringe cases, which is, little Jimmy wants to be a girl, and you have to nationalize and centralize it. Whereas, you could have a school that says this is our policy, and you could have another school that says this is our policy, and you could choose which one to send your kids to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the issue always comes back to a violation of the non-aggression principle and a violation of property rights.
Yeah.
And it's very easy to connect the dots, even if they seem abstract like that.
Yeah. And I want to focus, and I mentioned it earlier. I really want to focus on the official, the term Facebook official. It's not official till it's official and kind of certified by a certain entity, right? And I would say Facebook makes more sense because at least, it's kind of, voluntary. We sign up for Facebook. Whereas the government, I never signed the contract to allow government to rule my life.
Exactly.
Society, and it's sad because
my
it's our own
social
fault.
contract.
Yeah. The society, it only acknowledges that something is a fact, like marriage and kids, only if you have the marriage certificate, the birth certificate. The government's involved in everything.
The death certificate.
And again, when they get involved, now that the government is the institution giving out that marriage license, for example, that allows them to use that for manipulation. And I would love to write an article one day about the tax code, all 73,000 pages of the U.S. federal tax code, being used as a tool to manipulate behavior. And again, you could say marriage is good for society. I know a lot of conservatives would say that, and kids are good for society. Otherwise, humanity goes extinct. But currently, the U.S. tax code giving you money. If I were to get married right now, I'd save, I think, $7,000 a year in a tax credit. Just pay less taxes. I would save $7,000 if I got married. Isn't that an incentive? Giving you $7,000?
Absolutely.
That's reason to get married. So you're more likely to get married because there's a $7,000 carrot than not, right?
Right.
Same with kids.
Right.
I believe it was Marco Rubio, Democrat from Florida. I mean, Republican from Florida, and
same thing.
He wouldn't support the Senate version of the American American Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the new tax reform that Trump was supporting. Rubio wouldn't support it until I believe the tax credit for each child was increased from $1,000 to $2,000, I believe. So that's double the manipulation. And again, will I have kids? Yes, I plan to get married and have kids. But for the government to have the power to use the federal tax code to give you an incentive to do a certain act, any act, good acts like marriage or having children, or bad acts like anything else, buying a hybrid. You know how much money you'll get right now from the federal government, from state governments for buying a hybrid or an electric car?
How much?
Back, I don't know, New Hampshire. Back in New York, I could have gotten, I think it was $5,000 from the feds and another $2,500 from New York State.
That's crazy.
As a gift,
Yeah.
money, a tax credit,
Yeah.
as a gift, cash money
That's
for
crazy.
buying an electric car. And I was considering it.
Yeah.
And again, they manipulate behavior.
Yeah.
Now people think marriage is probably good, kids are probably good. Some people think electric cars are good. Personally, I think they're bad. And apparently the lithium-ion batteries are worse for the environment than the regular fuel. But they can manipulate behavior. That's the issue. They can give a marriage license to those who and give them a benefit for getting married, a tax incentive, money, a financial incentive to have kids. And who knows how many other behaviors, 73,000 other pages of other manipulation.
Right.
And it's sickening. Buying hybrids, buying certain things, buying solar panels. Oh, one day someone knocked on my door in New York, and we were renting, so it didn't apply to us. They said if you're the homeowner, we'll give you, Governor Cuomo in New York State is giving you like a $2,500 tax credit for you put solar panels on your roof. They're manipulating behavior, and I'm subsidizing it because I didn't have solar panels, so I'm paying more so that others who don't have solar panels can pay less taxes.
Great time to own a solar company in New York. So I don't mean to cut you off, Elliot, but we do have a special guest on the Liberty Block today. So were we going to do the screen for we'll be right back? Or
so we're going to take a 1 minute break. We're going to have Aaron Day, Libertarian candidate for governor in studio. We'll be back in 1 minute on Liberty Block Live. Don't go anywhere. Take a break, get some snacks, keep sharing this video out. We'll be back in 1 minute with Aaron Day.
1 minute.
Okay, Aaron, get yourself comfortable. Okay, we're going to start actually using two. So if you have something, if he asks you an open-ended question or something, you want to go on for a minute or two, just turn and face here. I'll switch it off.
Okay.
I'll
Good.
take care of that.
Good stuff.
Ryan, did you have more papers?
30 seconds, guys. Oh yeah, I can reach it from over here.
Okay.
Yeah, Ryan, pull that chair in just a hair. Just a hair.
Just the hair.
Probably have to bring a mic with you.
Can you see me?
Yeah, just move in about 5 inches. That'll work. That'll work fine.
All right.
Oh shit.
Okay, and you guys in just a second here. All right. In 3, 2, 1.
Welcome back to the Liberty Block. I'm Elliot Axelman. We're lucky to have Aaron Day here in the Axel studio. He's a Libertarian candidate for governor in the Libertarian primary, which will be September 11th, next Tuesday.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being here, Aaron. We have a ton of questions for you.
Thank you for having me.
So first, just go through your background. What have you done for a living?
For a living, I started my first company. I went to Duke. I dropped out, started an internet company in 1995, sold that. And for 20 years or so, I've actually been an entrepreneur, investor, and advisor in startup companies. That's my true passion.
What types of companies?
Healthcare companies, technology companies, and even clean technology, as you guys were actually talking about earlier. I've actually been in that field.
Excellent.
Doing things, with LED lighting and solar and everything else. And the thing is, the fascinating thing for me is that entrepreneurs want to solve problems. Entrepreneurs don't want waste. They're actually trying to figure out ways to reduce waste.
Mm-hmm.
And government intervention kills it every single time.
You had a great quote. What is that quote about government and solving problems? It was fantastic.
Well, I mean, government manufactures problems, subsidizes inferior solutions, and then bans voluntary solutions. That's essentially what it is. And I learned that firsthand. There are places in New Hampshire that are using the LED solar solutions that I was involved with.
So using LED as power?
Replacing, if you go to like a supermarket or an automobile dealership, the lighting there uses massive amounts of electricity.
Okay.
I mean, more so than anything that you can imagine in your house. And so you can replace that lighting with LED lighting and then put solar on top of it. But the reason that doesn't get mass adoption is because government subsidies favor inferior, like for instance, GE products. I mean, that's truthfully the biggest obstacle that I ran against. It wasn't, I can make an argument that says within 18 months, you'll get your money back if you buy this product. But at the end of the day, the challenge is that the government is actually subsidizing through the Department of Energy inferior products.
So what would your approach should you win the governor's race? What would be your approach to fixing this problem and allowing for solutions?
Well, it's about free markets in general. I mean, I've actually talked to a company called Transatomic that reuses spent fuel rods on the nuclear front. I met with them in Cambridge. It's about truly opening up the market, and that has not happened here in any way, shape, or form. What you always have, is people are presented with a decision. You have to decide between the lesser of two evils.
Mm-hmm.
This group of special interests has this solution. This group has the other. That's not how the world works. HP, Google, all of these companies were kind of started out of a garage. These are not people that you would have ever bet. They're all underdogs. They're all people that
they just had a solution.
They had a solution, they had inspiration. And what government kills is the inspiration that actually drives achievement and production. And so fundamentally, I would be about getting the government out of the business of selecting between two inferior
So back to
crony alternatives.
so you support a true free market.
Absolutely.
Now again, knowing from the GOP platform on a federal level and the New Hampshire GOP platform, I'm sure it says they support free markets. Why aren't you running as a Republican?
Well, this is an interesting misunderstood concept. I've actually been a libertarian 20 out of 23 years. I moved to New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project. I was actually the chairman of the Free State Project for a short period of time. And New Hampshire has very specific problems. We're actually in a, and no one will believe it. I'll say it now, and then 2 years from now, we'll replay this video. We have a financial crisis. We have expanded spending at 30 times the rate of population growth over the last 30 years, adjusted for inflation. So we are spending out of control.
Is that Democrats in power, Republicans, both, or
both? But more, I guess, tragically from my perspective, is learning that Republicans have actually driven the most damaging policies. You know, if I had to describe it, Democrats will tax you today, and they'll say, you know, we want to raise taxes. Republicans are slicker than that. What they'll do is they'll figure out a way to take from future generations. Margaret Thatcher once said, you know, the problem with socialism is sooner or later you run out of other people's money. Yep. Republicans have figured out how to tax and get into your children's money and your grandchildren's money. And it's that.
Maybe that's why they're incentivizing me to have kids.
Well, it is part of why they're incentivizing you to have kids. And it's part of the reason why we have to address these issues now. It's the challenge for me running for governor. If I say, well, the sky is falling and we have all these economic issues, people might say, well, low unemployment, so on and so forth. But the reality is spending is out of control. Pensions are underfunded by $5 billion. And if we don't address it, we are going to be in a really dire circumstance very quickly.
Yeah. So the state budget right now, it's done on a 2-year basis, right? So the budget for 2 years, and it's right around 12 billion now. So $6 billion a year New Hampshire spends,
roughly a little under 5.8, whatever. Yeah.
So what's been the pattern? Because I actually don't know the history of that. I know coming from New York, they're always increasing. Has it been increasing?
27 years ago, the budget was under $600 million.
That's less than 10% of what it is now.
Furthermore, on top of that, 30% of our budget is now Medicaid and comes from the federal government. I'm running on the basis of 2 big points. One is solvency, the other is sovereignty. If we don't fix our solvency issue, it's kind of like if you think about running your own household. If you're not collecting as much or earning as much as you're paying out,
eventually you're going to be homeless.
You're going to run out of money. But the sovereignty issue is a big one. You look back 27 years ago, we had minimal dependence on the federal government. At the rate we're going, within 10 years, we're going to reach that point where 50% of our budget comes from the federal government. Why this is important is if you look at the EU, for example, the EU, Greece, you have all of these riots, you have Brexit, you have all of these other issues. We will not, as the state of New Hampshire, be able to say, when the federal government comes and says, we want you to bail out Illinois, we want you to bail out California, we want you to bail out New York, we will have no standing in that if our own state is over 50% funded by the federal government. That's why Medicaid expansion and the repeal of it is the cornerstone of why I'm running for governor, because it's not even just about Medicaid. What's been problematic for me is a lot of people will say, well, it's a pet issue. It's not a pet issue. It's 30% of the budget, but it's not even. The lie about Medicaid is that Medicaid is providing government assistance for people that are poor. They've been taking money from Medicaid and diverting it for other purposes. And so it goes on and on and on.
Medicaid money from the federal government is going to the general fund in New Hampshire?
It has for 27 years. It started in.
That's bad.
It started 27 years ago. Judd Gregg, Republican, was running for. He was governor at the time. He was running for U.S. Senate, and there was a $35 million budget shortfall. Now, I mean, my experience is, you went back to the bio. I've started companies. I've hired hundreds of employees and everything else. If I'm in that situation, I'm going to say, well, if I've got a $35 million deficit, you either need to generate more revenue or spend less. More importantly, spend less. And what he came up with was a plan to steal money from our children.
And this is what you call Metascam?
It's Metascam.
Okay.
And it's well documented, and it's well understood. And what becomes more problematic is Judd Gregg went on to win. He was successful, became a U.S. senator, passed TARP. It goes on and on and on, but it's all a lie. And the question is, what are we going to do about it as citizens of New Hampshire? Do we want to take control of our state? Do we want to, be a sovereign state? And do we want to be solvent?
Yeah.
And Republicans and Democrats are both heading in the wrong direction, but surprisingly, Republicans are at the cornerstone of this.
I want to get into sovereignty as well, sovereignty from the federal government. So I was just ranting earlier today about how even the few laws that are state laws that are different state by state, the federal government controls, if not all of them, at least the federal government can control them all, and they regulate them all. I want to get into that as well, but I also want to talk about the Medicaid expansion, Obamacare Medicaid expansion. We've had now for the last 2 years, in November, it'll be 2 years of full Republican control of all 4 branches of New Hampshire government, right? So the New Hampshire Medicaid expansion has to be reauthorized every 2 years, right? Surely the Republicans in control, not supporting welfare. Surely they didn't reauthorize it, right?
The Republicans were the ones that, so here's what happened. Medicaid expansion is part of Obamacare, but the Supreme Court said, we're going to leave it up to the states. So in 2013, it was the Republicans that actually pushed for expanding Medicaid. Jeb Bradley and Chuck Morse. And in fact, at that time, the Democrats actually controlled the House, but yet the Republicans pushed expanding Medicaid. And so so passing and reauthorizing Medicaid expansion has been a 100% Republican problem.
That's sickening. And again, antithetical to the GOP platform, which you were in GOP leadership, right? So you know the platform.
Well,
I assume it does not support welfare.
Well, it doesn't support it. It's the number one issue. This is, you've probably seen some of these memes where it's like, well, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. What was the breakdown in distribution? They all had bipartisan support, right? When Obamacare passed, it was 100% Democrat with 0% Republican participation. I was involved and I was in meetings with faction leaders, with Jeb Bradley, with Chuck Morse. Everybody agreed within the Republican Party, except for Jeb Bradley and Chuck Morse, that we should not expand Medicaid. Mm-hmm. It is against the platform. It's against the financial welfare of the state. And I subsequently learned, it passed anyway. And the arm twisting and everything else I've written about in large detail, but a lot of it comes back to Sununu.
He supported Medicaid expansion, reauthorization.
John H. Sununu supported Medicaid expansion, and not only supported it, pushed it. So I mentioned Judd Gregg was the one who passed Metascam. Judd Gregg was the governor. John H. Sununu was the chief of staff to George H.W. Bush at the time. They're the ones that found the loophole to figure out how to steal money from the federal government to use it for the state budget. That was the original aspect of this. Fast forward 27 years, now here we are, and people are trying to kind of maintain their legacy. And Chris Sununu has been at the heart of it, even as executive counselor. So yeah, it's horrifying to me. And the more people that, as I said, I've written about it and documented the sources, the more people that learn and understand about it, the more there are a lot of people really frustrated, which is why I can't be a Republican. The only reason I was a Republican, again, was moving here as part of the Free State. We need to save the solvency of the state. And the Libertarian Party wasn't really in the game to be able to do that. And we don't have an infinite amount of time. But when I realized after,
that the Republicans are not the vehicle for freedom,
that they're not only not the vehicle, they're the ones promoting the issue. Then
right now, we both know a lot of people who are ideologically libertarian, who support little, if any, taxes and a total free market. They still, a lot of them, maybe the majority, are still trying to work within the GOP. Do they not understand? Do they not know about Metascam because it's complicated, or are they in denial, or do they think they could save the GOP?
A lot of what I've found is a lot of people, a lot of reps. This is why there's a difference, right? If you're running for state rep, you're representing your local district, so on and so forth. Governor is an executive function. You have to look at the whole standpoint. What I've found is there's been a strategy that says, let's look for the victories, whether on the Republican side or the Democrat side for liberty. So this is why we get things like, the bottle rocket law is changed and everything else. No one's looking at the bigger picture. We have a state. The state has a budget. whether people want to talk about money or not, if we're not solvent, we're not actually a state. And if we're not sovereign, then none of what we're working on matters. And none of the small bills or pet issues are even relevant. But I'm finding that a lot of reps, the average age of a state rep is 67. Most of the profile of these people, a lot of them are retired pensioners. I'd say only 10 to 20% of the people in the House are actually even ideologically there because they have a view about the future of the state and the future of government. Most of the rest of it is literally some form of cronyism, or it's a social club.
You're right that the future might matter more to those who are younger. Yeah. Well, the way it's set
with
up,
an average age of 67.
Yeah.
I mean, I know people that are 30. I know people that,
yeah.
All of the people that I know.
That's how it's set up because it doesn't pay, which I think is great that they don't pay state reps. But unless you're retired with pension, you can't really afford to put in a few days a week to do it.
You can't. But this is the big myth. Everybody says, well, it's honorable. I'm only working for $100 a year, right? But look at Sean Jasper. Sean Jasper was the Speaker of the House. And that's a long story, but he was picked by Sununu. And in fact, they rigged that because I spent a lot of time and money trying to get Bill O'Brien back into Speaker. Mm-hmm. They rigged that specifically so that Kelly Ayotte could get reelected. But in any event, Sean Jasper was there. He served his term, and now he's the head of agriculture. He makes a 6-figure salary. Yeah. Peter Bragdon, who was in the state Senate. Oh, yes. Public service. He's only making $100 a year. He's now making 6 figures working on the pension fund for the state of New Hampshire. So if you look at the distribution of this, it's yes, you can say I'm only working for $100, but
it's a stepping stone, and
is it a stepping stone to DC to become a lobbyist? Is it the stepping stone to get a cushy appointment? And in fact, in reality, with leadership, if you trace the history of it, that's exactly what it is. It's cronyism gone wild.
Yeah. So I want to address. Yeah, you had a question?
Yeah. So I have a question. So, being a libertarian is kind of a nice position because you have a lot of great aspects of being a Republican and a lot of great aspects of being a liberal. So, I have a Republican background myself, social or fiscal conservatism, but I found that I was quite often very socially liberal, and that sort of pushed me away from a lot of Republican policies. So my question, Aaron, is it's easy to say why a Republican would vote for you, but why do you think a liberal would vote for you? What policies do you have that would appeal to sort of the modern day liberal?
Well, I mean, fundamentally, I've always been a libertarian. Again, 20 out of 23 years. Mm-hmm. And so the government should get out of your bedroom, out of your garden, out of your business. Fundamentally, that's always been the case. The only reason I became a Republican was because the existential threats that we're facing in New Hampshire are fundamentally fiscal, and we've got to deal with those issues. So I don't think it would be all that hard. But there's another interesting thing, and I've found this because once we get through this primary, and I hope I win the primary, I think you'd be surprised. I work with Mayday. I formed a super PAC called Stark 360. I worked with Mayday. Larry Lessig. It was a Larry Lessig PAC to get, ironically, money out of politics. I was supporting Jim Rubin's. It was an anti-Scott Brown situation. I am not for getting money out of politics in the sense of we should have our First Amendment rights, but we were united in our opposition to Scott Brown. I've worked with the most extreme people on the left. They gave me $250,000 in this PAC. And so what I would say is this, when you look at the left, the real big issue that people on the left has is around the idea of oppression. It's about we feel we're oppressed by the government. Mm-hmm. But here's the interesting thing. No one has oppressed anyone more than the way the elite in the Democrat Party have oppressed Democrats. Look at what happened with Bernie Sanders relative to Hillary Clinton, right? Rigged election. And so my appeal to Democrats is a very simple one. If you believe that the big issue is fundamentally oppression, and you know that you have oppression within your own party, then maybe you should be open to the idea that government isn't the answer, and that we should look internally to ourselves and look to what we can do voluntarily as communities to solve problems. And again, I know a lot of people on the left there's wide agreement about corruption. There's wide agreement about cronyism. That to me is the hook. And in fact, I actually said this to somebody. A lot of the Ron Paul supporters from 2012 are gone from the Republican Party. There's a lot of similarity between the Bernie Sanders supporters in the Democrat Party and the Ron Paul supporters in terms of the young folks that are interested because
anti-establishment.
It's fundamentally anti-establishment. If we can unify, as you talked about the issues around gender, think about the issue of gender, race, all of these other things. These are politically engineered
to divide us, of course,
to divide us. Mm-hmm. And fundamentally, libertarianism is about individual rights. It's about saying whatever gender, whatever the dynamic is, we're just people. Yep. And so if everybody, libertarian, Republican, Democrat aside, says, look, this is about protecting individual rights, not about how can this party versus this party steal my children's future to pit us against one another, then that's how we win. That's how we win as libertarians.
Yeah, and I like what you say about protected classes and minorities. And I think you've said this, and a lot of libertarians have said this, and I've said this, the smallest minority is the individual. It comes down to one individual as you get smaller and smaller by cohort. And who protects the individual the most? Individual rights, the libertarians. The libertarian philosophy protects individual rights. And let's talk LGBT and gender and minority. Who protects the right of the LGBT individual? The gay individual, the transgender individual, who's as governor, who would protect their rights to keep 100% of their income the most? It would be a libertarian.
Once you label it, then it's a lobbying group. Then it's a law firm looking to get money. I have never seen animosity towards transgendered people until this whole situation was manufactured. Literally what I said before, the government manufactures the problem, subsidizes inferior solutions, and then bans voluntary.
And you see they're fueling that battle between maybe the conservative right and the LGBT left. And they want them to clash and fight, and then they'll run off with the gold.
And they'll run off with the gold. But I've never seen, I mean, you look at it on, I don't remember seeing an anti-transgender discussion, meme, or article.
It wasn't an issue at the forefront of our modern culture, no.
But now it is. Now it's been manufactured. And frankly, this also happened with race. People don't want to talk about it, but NPR of all people put out a thing. Even since the Civil Rights Act and since LBJ, racial division has gotten worse, and the disparity on the economic grounds has gotten worse. None of the laws have fixed anything.
It's interesting, and they manufacture a battle that's not there. I spoke about it on the Liberty Block when we were back in WGCH studio in Connecticut years ago, a little bit after the Ferguson, Missouri issue. I think it was, what was his name? Brown or whoever that black individual was killed by the cop. The big issue in Ferguson, Missouri, and there were some riots, but the big media and government focused in on that. I actually was in Ferguson very shortly after that incident. I was going around the country. I stopped in Missouri to meet a friend who was in Ferguson, and it's a very small town. In the bar, at least that we were at, was half black, half white. They got along 100% as well as anyone I've seen. They were literally laughing, singing, and dancing and together, hanging out.
So I mentioned we worked on Stark 360 with Mayday. Leftist. I mean, it's the most.
We all get along. We get along with each other better than they have us believe.
The person that did field ops for Mayday on that campaign went from Ferguson to New Hampshire, having never been here before.
Interesting.
And helped recruit over 100 people to push out literature without even knowing how the state worked. So I agree. So that's fascinating. I didn't realize that, but I've seen that. You know what? I'm going to tell you something. I've been able to work more with the left, the fringe left, than the establishment Republicans.
Yeah, and the ACLU, which is generally considered on the left, right? In New Hampshire, at least the New Hampshire ACLU, we know the libertarian movement and some conservatives as well, but the libertarians really, that whole movement of people works quite a bit with the ACLU. But they work on the issues of, I think, some police reform, law enforcement reform, also with the federal government, with the checkpoints in New Hampshire as well, with the federal and state issues. I'm sure you're more familiar with the state helping the feds kind of do these checkpoints. And the ACLU is attacking that and holding the government accountable and supporting individual freedom and supporting us in the Fourth Amendment and these warrantless searches and people stopping your car with the checkpoints. It's the ACLU, which is really on the left, and the libertarians find more common ground with the people on the left. And there are liberals who are at the ACLU. I went to an event a few weeks ago. It was how were you there? How many people were there? 50, 60, 100?
Mm.
And they were real liberals, big lefties.
Mhm.
But we had a fantastic time together. We were all talking together and all working on how can we, know our rights. It was called Know Your Rights, the event they put on, and how to know your rights in regards to the Fourth Amendment and checkpoints. So there's a lot of common ground, like you said. And I just want to drive home that point a lot, that we really do get along better with as far as the races, the ethnicities and minorities, but also the right and the left. We get along a lot better than maybe CNN and the government would have us believe, because they're fueling this divide.
I mean, in this state, I'm
Divide and conquer.
not even going to go into the details, but I met a couple of days ago with somebody on the left that's dealt with legal issues and everything. I've had legal issues here. If you speak out or whatever, you get sued. The commonality around corruption and cronyism. Yeah. And we need to promote that. That is the libertarian win. It's not pick the most fringe issue.
You know that's cliche at this point? Anti-corruption. Like, everyone says they're anti-corruption. Has it lost its meaning when you say I'm an anti-corruption candidate? Literally 100% of candidates run on a platform of anti-corruption. No one runs as a corrupt politician.
Well, no one runs it, but when you get in the lawsuit,
do people still hear it? You know what I mean? Their ears are dulled when you say I don't like corruption. They yeah.
But again, I look at New Hampshire as being a little bit different. I was just at a court hearing yesterday. Somebody who Janet Del Fuca, who I've followed and recorded in multiple court hearings, people in family court, people that have had family court issues with their children, divorces and everything else. That is a fundamentally economically driven issue. That is a cottage industry for lawyers. And you'll never find anybody more passionate about when you try to steal their money and steal their children than that. And it is completely corrupt in the state. What I've said over and over again is, even running for governor and everything else, running for governor is I can do a limited amount. It's a weak position, but you know what we need? We need Yelp for lawyers, judges, and cops. Look at this Lori's list where it's all redacted. So you have all of these cops that have engaged in all of this bad behavior. But when you see the final report, you don't know who it is.
For those who have never heard of Lori List, because I barely know anything about it, can you explain how it came to be? Isn't it the Chiefs? The Chiefs put certain cops on that list, right? When they're deemed untrustworthy, or how do they get on the list?
That's how it works. But all the information is redacted.
So the names are not visible.
The names are not visible. You can see here's the general action and everything else, but they go out of their way to make sure that you can't identify who it is. Here's the interesting thing. As a citizen, if you get pulled over, I was arrested 2 weeks ago for a ridiculous situation.
Jeez.
They'll put your mugshot everywhere for whatever it is right away. Innocent.
They don't care about your privacy.
They don't care about my privacy at all.
But when it's the cop or the government official,
like Nick Willard, who has been elevated. He was the chief of police of Manchester. He had a situation where he mysteriously at 5 o'clock in the morning ran into a granite mailbox pole running a state vehicle. Now, if I say anything about it, I'll get sued if I try to make any kind of implications about that. But I've certainly talked to people that have knowledge. He's promoted. This guy has been promoted. Does that happen to you as a citizen?
Right now, if I drove my car into a mailbox, I wouldn't be promoted.
No one would be promoted.
Yeah,
and if you did it in a company car, you probably have some financial liability.
And staying with law enforcement reform, because if you know libertyblock.com, like almost half of what we write about in the last year or two is actually on reforming law enforcement, because like you were just mentioning, law enforcement on a city and state level, they really do seem to be, if not 100% unaccountable, maybe 90, 95% unaccountable of I think every year of thousands, over 1,000 who are at least charged or prosecuted for murder, like less than 3, I believe, are convicted out of every 1,000. It's I think like 8 have been convicted over the last few years, I believe, of murder of thousands.
We've investigated ourselves and found ourselves not guilty.
I think we posted that recently. We investigate ourselves. Yep. Yes. What a pleasure it must be to investigate yourself. Next time my girlfriend says something, I'll say, honey, I investigated myself and I haven't found any wrongdoing that I've done. So about law enforcement reform, I'm not sure if you're following this. I wrote about the LPR issue a few months ago, and there was a new development having to do with a cop getting in trouble. The state of New Hampshire has always been, at least before 2016, I believe it was the only state in the U.S. whose state laws prohibited local police departments in the state from utilizing automatic license plate readers, license plate scanners on police mounted vehicles that perpetually scan every license around 1,500 a minute. And whenever something it pops up, it matches their database. So they're scanning license plates and running them against a database. Whenever something pops up that matches someone with a warrant or even a criminal history, I don't know, whatever it matches criteria wise, but it'll pop up on the computer that the cops have in their car and alert them. And I've heard that it actually makes a noise and alerts them, and then they pull over that car. So it's continuously scanning every license plate. So that was illegal in New Hampshire. I believe all 49 other states allowed for it. In 2016, it was a bill submitted that repealed that ban on LPRs, license plate readers in the state, and it passed. And Governor Hassan, at the time of 2016, signed it into law. You know who proposed the bill? A Republican.
Was it Neil Kirk?
I don't remember.
This is the
Republican rep from Bedford, maybe somewhere in the area.
The odd part about this is that this was a big liberty issue. We obviously, to have the status of not doing this was something that we fought
How
for.
did that bill pass?
In this actually, in the darkness and then in the shadows, because to have that happen under kind of a Republican watch is amazing. But Neil Kirk, who was the chair of finance, who isn't running again, which watch his appointment, by the way. We talked about this whole idea of, oh, well, people only work for $100 a year.
Then you use the house and you get a promotion.
Let's see what happens to Neil Kirk, because Neil was, I believe, the chair of finance. And I've met Neil Kirk has been in my basement. He's been in my house. I've talked to him at length. He was always the privacy guy. And he backed this bill. He was the one that prevented it in the past, and then when it actually
was it pressure from police unions or what was it? Do you know?
I have no idea, but I didn't really like Neil Kirk. A lot of people in the liberty community kept on telling me he was a great guy. I met with him. He was not in the right place on Medicaid expansion, which to me, again, it's not a pet issue. It's 30% of the budget.
Yeah.
It affects the health and wealth of every man, woman, and child in the state of New Hampshire. He was wrong on that. But I was told he was like the guru on technology, and so he came up to the basement, and I walked through all this stuff, and he was supposed to be this privacy expert, and he's not even on Facebook. So it's kind of this weird dynamic. So I don't know what caused it, but we should research it and find out.
So
because
yes, so
it went off the rails 180 degrees.
Yeah. So the bill allowed for police departments to utilize it, and then I think a few months ago, or maybe a year ago, a town of Lincoln, New Hampshire, I believe, so north of here, the center of the state, their police department, they said they were going to be the first one to utilize the license plate reader on a police vehicle. I think they got one. Yep. So a few months ago, they started using this, and I believe it's already been in practice. And there was an article, I think a Union Leader article published about it. And the chief, I think Chief Ted Smith of Lincoln Police, was quoted as saying, "We're very excited about this," and he believes it would be a good tool. And I think either him or someone else in the article referenced how it would be used to catch maybe murderers, maybe kidnappers, of course. But I think the scanner for our safety, I think the scanner scans license plates, and if something is a hit against your database, then it's a hit, and then that cop knows. And the article says that these LPRs will be scanning 1,500 license plates per minute, 1,500 every minute, perpetually scanning license plates. You know how many people live in Lincoln? 1,700. Yeah. So just over a minute, in under a minute and a half, every single person in Lincoln, assuming every person has a license plate on the vehicle, is being scanned. And this is a perpetual scanning of every license plate. And not only scanning them, it's an investigation. So we talk about the Fourth Amendment, where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy in public. And I understand when I'm in my car, I don't have a reasonable expectation to be private on the public roadway. But I do have a reasonable expectation to be private, to not be investigated, right? Now, when a cop pulls me over, then that threshold, from what I understand legally, I'm not a lawyer, disclaimer. From what I understand, that there's a certain threshold. As the cop pulls me over, it's called suspicion. The technical term, he has suspicion I committed a crime, and he could give me a ticket, which is charging me with the crime, speeding or reckless driving, whatever it might be. And then he could do a bit more of an investigation. He can ask me some questions maybe, or do a bit more. But when you're just driving, when your car's parked, because your license is still on the car, right? If we were in Lincoln right now and your car is parked outside, your license is being scanned constantly as the cops are driving around. So they know where you are. Yep. Now, again, Lincoln's a small town of 1,700, which is good and bad. You might have some cop who has an ex-wife. He wants to know her whereabouts. Literally, by utilizing this license plate scanner, this is ridiculous for privacy. It's a black hole. He could see where his ex-wife is, whose house she's at now, who she's seeing, where she's going, see their schedule, and see at 2 p.m. she's here, and at 5 p.m. she's here, and on Wednesdays she's here, using this license plate scanner system, which is perpetually not only scanning but investigating every license plate. It's sickening. So again, but I want to mention is in the article it mentioned that in New Hampshire the law allowed for the shortest amount of time for that data, I guess the license plate itself, to be kept in the system is 3 seconds, I believe, 3 minutes, and then if there's no hit, it's gone from the system. That's what they say. I don't understand the technological aspect of it. I'm not an IT person, but that's what they say. I don't know if I trust them, but they said, they would of course be worried about our privacy. What just happened a few weeks ago, and I think I published this too. The chief, Ted Smith, was indefinitely suspended by the town manager. The chief of this police department for what? For actually not respecting privacy and for actually releasing confidential information. How ironic is that?
Well, it's kind of expected at this point.
Incredible.
And again, going back to I know the Liberty community, the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance, and others were behind protecting this scanning originally. So the fact that it happened under Republican control when Neil Kirk was there was baffling. And when you flagged it, and I talked to other people and I looked at the bill, I'm like, how is it the guy that people say is the privacy guy is supporting the bill that's now violating it? Honestly, I'm going to tell you, I was baffled, and no one has a good answer.
So as governor, would you sign a bill reinstating that ban on LPRs in New Hampshire?
Absolutely. I mean, that's kind of a non-issue. I mean,
Excellent.
and you look at the Article 8 of the New Hampshire Constitution. We need to get back to that in a big way. The balance of power here. I mean, people forget the cops work for us, not the other way around. And it's been completely twisted the other way in a very short period of time. So yes, I would absolutely support repealing that, but I'm still trying to understand why it happened as well. With Republican control, with this guy who was the chair of the finance committee, that everybody told me, Liberty people told me, is the privacy guy, who I met with and didn't support. And it turns out he went the other way. It's like, look,
it's sad to say, but a lot of conservatives and Republicans really trust law enforcement and support them and want law enforcement to really have a scary amount of power. That's what it seems.
Well, I still don't know what the answer is on this. You're right in general, but I still don't understand this bill and why this happened. It actually defies the history of even that legislator. So more research needs to be done.
Yeah. So in the final 10 minutes we have, I'm going to go rapid fire and ask you a whole lot of questions.
Sure.
And I'm sure a lot of listeners, a lot of viewers want to know about the opioid crisis, which is a massive issue in New Hampshire, although it might be overblown in some aspects. But what would be your general approach in a real quick 1 minute, 30-second synopsis to the opioid crisis of people dying in New Hampshire?
Open up to the free market. The government has manufactured the problem. I mean, you can look at the History Channel and everything else. The government has created the drug problem. But when you want to talk about funding inferior solutions, I mean, I've been in lawsuits around this. I keep on asking every drug treatment center in this state to provide objective evidence that the Medicaid funded treatment that they're using works, and no one has given me any data. And in fact, and it's public, and I'm not shy about it. You can see it. I've had people say, well, we need more money to be able to figure out what the answers are. I had one guy who's been running a treatment center for 10 years who has 200 employees telling me we need more money to be able to figure out how to measure the results. In the real world, in business, when you come up with an idea, you figure out how you're going to measure whether it's successful or not. This isn't how this works at all. We need a moonshot situation here. We need new ideas to figure out how to solve this problem, and they will never come from the government.
Well, a lot of people say the government should take the lead on the opioid issue. It's a public health crisis, right? You can call anything a public health crisis, and it affects public health. It does. Now, people say that it's the government's, one of their primary responsibilities is to keep the public safe and healthy and alive. And 500 people a year, on average, I believe, die in New Hampshire of opioid issues. In general, would you support, and to what extent do you think it's the state government's responsibility to keep us safe? And I have here, that's 500 die of opioids, but in New Hampshire, 2,800 people a year, at least in 2016, died of cancer. So almost 6 times the amount of people died of cancer. Should the government take that? How about heart disease? It kills 2,600 in 2016, so 5 times that amount.
The government doesn't solve any of these issues.
Even if we ban soda?
Even banning soda. I mean, I know you're from New York. That's a big issue.
They almost banned
that's
it.
not going to be the
Ban
panacea.
straws.
But you know what? I'm going to say something about New Hampshire, and not to get into a lot of detail. We're the cryptocurrency capital of the world, and there was a group called the Pineapple Fund. I don't even know, man or woman, gender. I don't know who it was. Some individual of unspecified gender put $55 million into a bunch of nonprofits, kind of randomly, to look at various different things, investing in using MDMA to try to solve PTSD, a whole variety of different issues. I would call, and we have a lot of wealthy people in this state. I would call for, it is a big problem. It requires experimentation. Let's do it privately, and let's get the state out of it. And I know, and I've talked to a lot. Look, this has affected me personally. I mean, I have an uncle that was in the military 30 years ago. I don't know how long ago. I got addicted to painkillers, and to the point, but they cut off his meds, and he's a smart guy, kind of, when I explained the rest of the story, but figured out how to shoot himself strategically in the kneecap so that he could get more pain meds. Right. I mean, this is, I've seen this situation, and I have other stories, but we need real solutions. And what happens is, when the government funds something, when you actually dig into the details of Medicaid, they fund things that are evidence-based. And all evidence-based means is that essentially it's better than nothing. It's not that it's not that it solves the problem with 50% accuracy. It's that if everybody's dying and this thing is like 2% effective,
it's technically better.
Then it's technically evidence-based. But there's another problem that happens. If something that's evidence-based, if you say, I've done a clinical trial and it says this methodology works, but then you take that methodology and you give it to unproven people, many of whom are addicts themselves, only, quote, recently recovered. I'm not even making this up, and you know this. I know you're an EMT. I mean, we have situations right now where people are talking about Narcan parties. We have people that
I've heard of Narcan parties.
People that are called frequent flyers that are going in and out of the hospital, ODing, being brought back with Narcan and everything else. And with all the statistics that we look at, the death rate is down, which is great. But the underlying reason of are more people addicted, and are they becoming not addicted? That hasn't been improved. And everything that Sununu does, everything the federal government does, is a photo op. And what we're losing is the ability for people to experiment. Even going back to the idea of companies, people working in garages and everything. I don't know what the answer is. And as governor, I'm not saying I have what the solution is. People know what there are solutions out there. They will never be implemented or scaled unless
the government monopolizes it and elbows them out. It boxes them out. Yeah. But one solution actually that a lot of people in New Hampshire are supporting, that Sununu came out and said he will not support, is expanding marijuana being more legal, so that people, either for pain or recreation or for anything else to treat other issues, could maybe resort to marijuana, which is of course less addictive and less dangerous than opioids. What would be your thoughts on that? Would you support bills that would expand maybe marijuana medically, recreationally?
Well, I mean, I would support it, but just at a fundamental basis, it's kind of the fact that we have state-run liquor stores. The irony of all of this is that alcoholism is a bigger health problem in the state of New Hampshire than the opioid crisis. No one wants to talk about that. It's absolutely true. And, I'll dig back into Medicaid expansion for a minute. The way Medicaid expansion worked is the federal government was going to subsidize 100% of it. It was going to taper down to 90% over a period of time. And they came up with some fraudulent ways to come up with that gap, because the politicians were saying, well, no taxpayer will pay for this. Ultimately, the way we're funding now, the gap between what the federal government is subsidizing and what is covered by the state, is a tax on alcohol sales. And they're using the opioid crisis as the justification for it. So
they need to spend more on the opioid crisis.
So in other words, alcoholism is a bigger problem than the opioid crisis, but we want to make more money off of that so that we can siphon some of that money to go to opioid treatment that has no definitive objective success metrics that we can talk about. And I have spoken about this, and I've been sued. I've done a whole bunch of things about this. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd.
Yeah. So real rapid fire before we close out in a few more minutes. A bunch more questions for you. The fiscal conservatives, you discussed why fiscal conservatives should vote for you. as far as the social conservatives, I don't think we spoke about yet the transgender bathroom bill that, we were speaking about it with Ryan earlier. The transgender bathroom bill that Sununu signed and the legislature passed that forces private businesses to allow people into any gender restroom that they identify with. What do you think is the solution to that? Would you support it or not support it?
Well, I wouldn't support it, but more importantly, I mean, I'm friends with Rogers Johnson, who's the head of that whole diversity initiative, and he maybe mistakenly sent me. That whole thing was a sham. It was just it was a shell to look like he's for diversity. I actually got a message from him saying, well, we don't like the conclusions that our own diversity committee came up with. Can you help organize conservatives against it?
Interesting.
It's all BS.
Who should make the decision on where people could use the restroom as far as going into businesses?
It's a property rights issue. It comes down to individuals and businesses, period. There's no question. And, the New York Times came out with this article, incendiary article, which I put out on Facebook that has like over 700 comments on it. It said, well, New Hampshire's 94% white,
Mm-hmm.
And they're thinking, instead of live free or die, we need to be diversify or die.
Mm-hmm.
And I sent that out. It's like, are you nuts? That we don't have I have not seen a racism problem here, but it's also not it's
just not an issue.
No one's preventing anybody from moving to New Hampshire. We don't have a wall preventing people around.
Most people in New Hampshire support free movement, support diversity, encourage people to move here.
They absolutely do, and I'm part of the Free State Project, and that's happened. I mean, Carla is an African American. She's from South Africa. And she's white, but technically,
yeah.
But I mean, frankly, I think the Free State Project maybe has changed the ethnic balance,
probably,
but not by design, not by law, not by edict, not by what people are trying to. And again, with everything else, I've never seen jokes about transgender people until people tried to make a law about it, and until a consultant was in and a lawyer was in, and there was a protected class that people could profit by. I've never seen any of this. I've not experienced or seen racism, even just generically, any of that in this state. It's being manufactured by politicians who want to basically
I think there's some race baiting in that article. I think there's definitely some race baiting. They want white people to come out and kind of go on the offensive, and then they can point at the white people going offensive, being alt-right, being white supremacist, and create a battle. I think that's what it is. And what's interesting about the article saying New Hampshire, a state 94% white, asks how do you diversify a whole state? Incredible, disgusting article. We spoke about it a few weeks ago on the program. We were both pretty angry, and rightly so. What's interesting is that they were saying that New Hampshire is too racist and too white, and it is 94% white, and it's natural. And there are states that I'm sure have a different makeup. Like where I come from, the Bronx, Queens, it's like 95% Black and Hispanic, which is fine. It's natural. What's interesting is that just last month alone, I happened to be in the courthouse when they were doing the swearing-in ceremony for U.S. citizenship because someone was becoming a U.S. citizen that day. There were 79 people from 33 countries who worked so hard and paid the $700 and waited the years and filed all the paperwork because they wanted to become U.S. citizens. And they did it here in New Hampshire because they were living in New Hampshire. People from 33 different nations. There are like 195 countries, but as far as like actual big countries with a lot of people, there are pretty much 33. This was every major country. Almost every major country in the world. There are people who moved from there to here, some from Iran who might have been persecuted, some from South America, from Latin America, from everywhere everywhere in the world, moving here and lived in New Hampshire and became a U.S. citizen, and they loved New Hampshire and they wanted to be here, became citizens. Clearly, they don't think we're too racist or too white. So that's an interesting point as well. A few more rapid fire questions.
Yep.
The homeschoolers. I know there are a lot of homeschoolers, and I hope to be one day. As far as a homeschool parent,
Me
why
too.
should they vote for you as opposed to the great Democrats, Marston and Kelly, and the great Republicans, Sununu and the other libertarian? Why should they support you?
Well, I have 8-year-old twins, one boy, one girl, and in fact, I moved here in part because of this issue. New Hampshire generally ranks high on this on the school issue. I am for school choice, but not necessarily in the bill that was put out, this SB 193. What we actually need to do is to get the state out of education together. What I'd like to see, and I don't have the ability as governor to, promote this or push it forward. I'd like a constitutional amendment that gets the state out of local education. You look at this, it's a wrong. And I'm so sick of it. I live in Bedford. I pay a lot of money in property taxes.
I've heard
a lot of money in property taxes, and I don't send my kids to to the public schools there. And that's not.
And you're being forced to pay. You homeschool or private school?
I'm sending them to private school.
So you are financially being stupid because you're paying for 2 schools for each one.
I'm paying. Well, it's worse than that because Bedford is the wealthiest town per capita. That money is then even redistributed amongst the other
to the state and
public
redistributed
schools.
a little more. Yeah.
So I mean, I'm getting hit multiple times,
and you don't get any money back. So you pay in a few $1,000s a year towards the public school system. You don't use it. Do you get any of that money back to use for your private schools for your kids?
So I get none of it back. I mean, I'm paying almost $20,000 a year, and I'm paying.
And would you support an ESA or a voucher bill to give some money back to parents of homeschool kids?
So the issue with this is, I would support an ESA bill if it were clean. What I'm worried about, though, kind of like with Medicaid, it's kind of like what happened with Medicaid. What the politicians did with Medicaid is they said, well, let's take the federal money and give it to private insurers, but then we'll have all of these regulations. So what can happen, sadly, is you can destroy the private market by having the government dictate and be the funnel by which money goes to those private
So you'd support a
institutions.
real simple bill. Again, it could be one paragraph. Give the money they spend on property taxes, which is supposed to go to education, give them the money back, or at least a percentage of it, so that they can get it in cash and use it for private school or homeschool.
Or homeschooling, but no means testing, no strict criteria. But even if you do that, this is the big problem, right? I talk to people. I mean, I'm running for governor, and again, it's a weak position. There's not, I'd fire if I'm used to starting companies, right? I'd fire the AG we have immediately. I can't fire this guy. He's got a longer term. I didn't hire him privately, but that's a separate conversation for a different day. I'd fire him immediately. I can't. People come to me, family law, everything else. What would you do with this? I can't do anything about it. I'm kind of hamstrung. But a lot of people, as I'm going across the state and speaking to different groups, what they say to me is, property taxes are my biggest issue. That is the big impediment. And here's the thing with property taxes. I can do a little bit about it, but across the state, 56% of property taxes go to public education. If you want to fix the property tax situation, run for school board. The participation rate that is under 20% in those elections. You can actually have a big impact on these local school board races. That's how you affect your property taxes. So even if you do an ESA bill, even if you do school choice, because here's one of the problems that I had. People argue, well, if you have school choice, this will be great. It won't be great economically. And here's why. In the last 20 years, we've seen a massive, we've had, or actually, I think it's the last 10 years, student enrollment is down 20%.
In the public school system?
Now, if you said, well, enrollment's down 20%, I look forward to the cost must be down 20%.
Of course, cost per student, yeah.
Nope, costs are up. And it's projected that in the next 10 years, it's going to be even worse. And so here's one of the problems that I have with the ESA bill, which is it says, well, people will have more choice, students will have more choice, but it doesn't mean you're going to control costs. And honestly,
they'll still spend a whole lot.
They'll still spend more, and they'll come up with some other. I've been in the school board meetings, even in Bedford, where it's like, well, now we have to compete with the private schools. Well, the reason people are moving is that we haven't spent enough money. The actual cost of government, the actual amount of spending is the problem. And unless we actually cut spending, we are going to be in a very bad situation as a state. And so I am for absolutely reducing the size of government. And when it comes to school choice, I want the state out of local. And I encourage people, because it's not within my purview, to run for their local school board so that they can help control their own costs and have a bigger say locally in what goes on.
Yeah. Next question, switching gears a little bit. We haven't discussed it yet. Why should the gun owners vote for you? They're happy with what Republicans are doing. At least they aren't destroying that issue as far as freedom. Why should they support you as opposed to the Republican or others?
I've been A-rated in 2016. I ran for United States Senate in 2016. I received an A-star rating from the New Hampshire Firearms Coalition. I believe Kelly Ayotte received a C or a D rating. I received an A rating again. But and I even look at this because I haven't filled out necessarily even all the gun surveys, and anybody who's been in New Hampshire will know the number of fractions.
You've seen the memes you post.
Well, yeah, the number of gun groups is kind of, it's awesome on the one hand, right? It's like, wow, all right, live free or die. We are here now. With that said, I am fully for not only constitutional carry, but to state my position, I'm for 3D printed guns. This is a natural rights issue. This is about being able to fundamentally defend yourself. And so my rating stands for itself, but I'm even, kind of more beyond that. And I don't want to badmouth the NRA, but the NRA has not been as,
oh, they already said they want to regulate it, right?
They want to regulate it. And that's, I'm not going to get into Oliver North and that whole background, but I'm not for that. This is about defending yourself, and this is about your natural rights.
Yeah, it's the natural right to self-defense, which is a natural right. Everyone has the right to defend themselves, and the natural right to property. It's property rights. And property, property, we think about money and cars and houses, but a piece of metal or polymer is also property. So absolutely. I think it's a property rights issue and these natural self-defense rights issue, and the printing, it's a First Amendment issue as well, of course.
It absolutely is. And I think Cody Wilson is a hero, and as former chair of the Free State Project, I look forward to seeing him. And
Liberty Forum, right?
I will be at Liberty Forum in February, and am really happy that he's going to be there and support his initiatives 100%.
I have two more questions. We're going to end on a high note. Do you think our grandchildren, your kids when they grow up and have kids, and my grandchildren will have more or less freedom if they live in New Hampshire than we do now?
Depends on what we do. Inertia, I would say no. So you say it's a high note.
The next question will be more positive.
So it's up to what we do. I'm frustrated. I'm exhausted. I've been sued. I've had people from the Attorney General's office come to my house and everything else. There's a lot of resistance to maintaining live free or die. We have to fight for it, but I think we can win. And I think this is the best place and the best opportunity to make that happen.
I agree. And going off that, what would you say your favorite thing is about New Hampshire?
It is fundamentally that it is the live free or die state. I came here as part of the Free State Project, and that's somewhat controversial. It's less controversial than it used to be. NHPR did a this bracket of, what is peak New Hampshire, and ultimately the finalists were the live free or die motto itself, and versus the Free State Project. As much as I'm a transplant here,
but how long ago did you move here?
Almost 10 years ago now. But when I talk to people that have been here,
it's more recent than a lot of people. A lot of people moved over the Mass border, in the last months or years.
They have, but
and you know who Mara Sullivan is.
Well, Chicago's fully represented, but partially, temporarily, transitorily represented with her. But what I find when I talk to people, I now know more people that are not part of the Free State Project than are, and they kind of laugh. It's kind of like, well, it's not like we invented live free or die, or we invented.
It was already free before the FSP moved here.
It's in the DNA. It truly is. At NHPR, not that I agree with them on 90% of the issues, but they nailed it. The Free State Project is synonymous with live free or die, and live free or die is the DNA of New Hampshire, and that's why I'm optimistic. That's why I'm here. That's why I have kids. This is all part of why I'm here. So.
Fantastic. Anything else you want to say to the voters of New Hampshire before the primary September 11th?
I just say, please come out and vote. Pull a Libertarian ballot if you're undeclared. If you haven't registered yet, register and either as undeclared or as a Libertarian, and pull a Libertarian ballot. And when you look at the races and everything else, it's a lot of negativity and everything else. We need to change the dynamic. We need to make sure. I've joked about this. It's probably not a good joke, but make 9/11 great again. We need to, because that's the date of the primary. But frankly, if we're going to, this is the beacon of liberty, is New Hampshire, and we have.
And once we go under, there might not be a place to run.
There won't be a place to run, and the Republicans and Democrats have gone out of their way to tie us to Washington D.C. and to increase spending. We can change it. So instead of deciding between the lesser of two evils, choose to own your own life, choose to make decisions for your family, and for your community, and reject the two-party system, because and I think it's in the DNA of everybody that's going to be watching this. It is inherent to New Hampshire.
Excellent. Thank you. Tune in next week for the other Libertarian candidate running in the primary, Gilletta Jarvis. That'll be on Liberty Block Live from our Facebook page at 7 p.m. on Thursday evening. Aaron Day, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Appreciate
it. Fantastic.
Thank you.
And to everyone, we'll drop the Patreon link down below so we can keep this amazing production and the AV engineer going. We'll put that link in the comments, and we'll link to all the other articles we referenced. Thank you so much, and please share the video, and please at least vote in the primary on September 11th in a week and a half on Tuesday. Thank you very much, and have a good night.
Clear.
Awesome. Thank you. Awesome.
Good stuff.
Yeah. That was sweet. Yeah. An hour, I think. Yeah.
Oh, is that how long it was?
An hour, I think. Yeah.
All right, good.
It's a lot of shit. Yes, we got most of it. Good. Yeah.
No, I'm going forever. This is but I learned something very early on. The worst interaction I ever had was that LPNH event, and the reason why